My name is Don Alexander, and I appreciate everyone's time today. I'm the Managing Director and President of GeneCoda, who is a professional and executive search firm that connects outstanding firms in the life sciences sector with executives who help bring game-changing treatments ultimately to patients. And I'm pleased to be here today with John Campbell. John is the head of corporate recruiting at LabCorp's Covance division, who's an industry-leading CRO focusing on a full spectrum of non-clinical, clinical, and commercialization services. John, thanks for your participation. Today I'll be speaking with John about some of the differences in contingency and retained recruiting. But first, let me start with a definition of contingency and retained recruiting. Basically, the differences between the two are in payment models. So contingency recruiting, if a search firm places a candidate, then they get paid. In a retained model, a portion of the total fee to be paid is usually in advance of the search project start date. And then there are various milestones along the placement route, if you will, or at certain intervals, which are generally at the production of a short list of candidates and or at the conclusion of the search itself, which usually is the start date or coincides with the start date of the placed candidate. So John, I was wondering if you could please share your thoughts about these different models given your experiences.
Sure, happy to, Don, and thanks again for the opportunity to chat with you. I think, my experience has been in both models. They both have a value kind of based on the kind of role, the level of the role that an organization may be looking to fill. I think it's pretty standard that the more senior level of the role, the more likely a retained model might be used. The more junior certainly would not go with a retained and be more the contingency-based model. I think in many cases that I've experienced in organizations I've been in, we've got hiring managers that tend to get more comfortable sometimes with external third parties to help them in searches because one, either they lack confidence in their internal talent team, their capability, or they simply don't have the resources internally to help them to the degree they certainly like. I think most hiring managers probably have not dealt with the retained side of it simply because it's more rare and much more, I think, focused on the very senior level roles. And I think from a candidate's perspective, retained is certainly a higher touch, which would be expected since that's kind of what you're paying for as the client. You'd expect that to be the case. And I think you would also have a higher sense of satisfaction with the outcome, hopefully. And, I think there is a reason and a rationale for using contingency, but sometimes that can be viewed as more of a, they're just sending us resumes hoping something will stick, as opposed to really taking the time and the energy to sit down, knowing that they are exclusive in this particular case as the search agency, and really wanting to make sure that they find the ideal candidate and that the experience is a positive one all around for the client and the candidate. So, Don, it would be interesting, from my perspective as a client, potentially, to understand you as that third party or that agency. Kind of as I mentioned, you've got the constituents that would be part of this process, and it would obviously be very interesting to understand from your perspective, kind of those three firms or three constituents: the clients, myself in this case, the candidate, and then of course the firm, which would be you. And I'd ask you kind of about your thoughts in these areas, and maybe we could start from the client.
That's great, John, and thanks for that overview. It's really important to understand what's important to all three of these different groups, as well as your experiences with them. So from a client standpoint, we tend to ask a number of different questions, I think, of clients, and encourage them to consider these different questions or different aspects of any given search. One might be, is a performance guarantee important, to the particular search? is candidate exclusivity important, to the given client? In addition, how great is the need for speed? So we think about the old adage when considering quality, speed, and cost, perhaps choose two. But if we're dealing with a replacement search in short order, speed can be very important and critical. We do think about, is the search confidential in nature, which can probably tilt the search more to a retained model. We also think about the importance of existing relationships versus what I'm going to call the hunting aspects for new talent. So the definition, in essence, of a Rolodex is, does a firm have, a good base of talent, if you will, within a particular discipline to draw from, and how reliant would they be on going out and seeking new prospects, if you will, for any given search. So that's important. Now some, maybe some clients may be less open to starting without an existing Rolodex of some sort, but there can also be sometimes certain benefits to that as well. We also consider how important is passive versus active candidate sourcing. So in essence, passive sourcing would be perhaps looking into the ranks of a competitor or set of competitors as far as that goes, and really getting the message out to those candidates that may be working for competitors. Additional considerations could include an off-limits list, and that would be, in essence, a list that would be perhaps a grouping of firms that are recruiting from, like ours couldn't go and actually call because they have pre-existing relationships with other firms. And then finally, I'd think about, is this kind of a one-off search? I mean, is this something that maybe the organization doesn't ordinarily recruit in its due course of business? And that could be another thought pattern around what a client might be thinking as they shape the contingency versus retained models.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm glad you brought up that maxim about quality, speed, and cost. Choose two. I think that's important to level set expectations with a client. I do that when I'm talking to a hiring manager within the organization. And I think that's a great way to establish a relationship built around trust if you've got those things from the get-go. So how about, Don, the candidate viewpoint? What's your perspective there?
Yeah, that's a great question, John. And my main concern, I guess, with some contingency searches anyway, is kind of what contingency can say about a company's brand. So a few years ago, I had an experience where I called a candidate for a director of manufacturing opportunity at a biotechnology client, and I happened to be, I think, the fourth recruiter that called this particular individual, and he was a good prospect for them. And what he said to me is, "What is you're the fourth recruiter that's called me this week. Is this company desperate?"
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of set in as I thought about it for a second, because what really happened there is that client, if you will, lost out on that candidate as a result of me being the fourth one unknowingly to in essence call him. And I think that companies need to think about that from the perspective of recruiters going after the same or a similar pool of people, and what that can actually do in terms of potential brand damage to a client. I like to think about it anecdotally as a number of sharks swimming around, if you will, a piece of bait in the open water. One thing I like to think about in concert with that is is who's actually delivering the message, if you will, or what I call kind of a pitch person. So professional delivery of the message is very important to attracting the highest performing talent. And an understanding, I think, of the nuances of not only the client themselves, but the overall market landscape can be very important. finally, what's in it from a candidate point of view. So really understanding deeply why the correct talent would potentially get up and change their chair to you as a new employer. In addition to that, I think retained recruiters are generally seen as more knowledgeable. They also can show that the client is serious about the hire, and they expect a certain amount. Candidates, that is, expect a certain amount of discretion and confidentiality in their representation. So some of those points can also go to the retained search model versus contingency. And, I think to your point earlier, I mean, some contingent firms also kind of operate with the notion that if I throw enough stuff up on the wall, some of it will stick. So.
Yeah, and I think it's a great point. And these days, the candidate experience through the process is critically important to most organizations that care about their brand. And to your point, I think a retained model certainly ensures that the message is consistent with what the organization wants it to be, and that relationship is based on an understanding of that message, and the candidate doesn't have any question about what it means to be part of that organization. Great stuff, Don. And I guess my final thought would be, as the search firm yourself, what's your viewpoint on these models?
Yeah, the third leg of the stool, John, as they say, is the contingency messaging. I often think about, just to kind of play back into the, what the candidate hears, and the way they're approached oftentimes is what I'm going to call disclose and then screen. So if I'm on, one point about contingency is that it's often viewed by search firms as a foot race, because it is. It's a speed race to get to appropriate candidates to be able to present to their clients. And as such, the notion of disclosing who the client is up front and maybe creating some kind of image in that candidate's head before firms actually had the opportunity to screen them on what is of interest to them, what is of interest in the work that they're doing today, what would make what do they feel would help make their career better off in the next scenario. So I think that idea of disclosing then screening versus the flip side of that, screening versus disclosing, which is generally what's found in a retained search model. You have to think about those variables. And so, one thing we think about that may be analogous is when you go into a doctor, a quality doctor is going to ask you a series of questions before they make the diagnosis. And so we need to think about it, I think, in those terms. So in contingency, again, to summarize speed rules, it's a bit of really a foot race. And ultimately, I think it's what it boils down to is can a search firm make a placement? So that's really what they're thinking. Can I make a placement with this set of circumstances that the client has put forth?